Okay, hi, thank you for letting me have the last slot. I don't think anything I'm going to say is a big surprise because we've already touched on things to do with what's out of date in the Code of Conduct. And we've already talked about the fact that the code is 40 years old. So I think it's very right to ask us what's out of date in the code. Initially, discussions of this from the advisory group has been focused around Principle 2 of the code and its accompanying rules, which focus on conservation and destructive investigation. And taking a quick look through the digital AGM archive that we've got on the Cifa server, I can't see any changes proposed at AGMs to Principle 2, so it's pretty much as it was written. So looking at the wording of Principle 2, which is there, I think we probably don't question the responsibility for conservation of the historic environment that we all have. And generally the start of Rule 2.1 could well still be quite sound. My bits of paper. Sorry, going too fast. So we all know that archaeologists frequently make or advise on decisions about whether an asset of archaeological interest is preserved and whether it should be subject to destructive investigation. But as we move on through 2.1, we start to suggest that investigation in archaeology should only happen, we should only investigate archaeology when it's not possible to keep it. And I've highlighted, like Joe has, that's not highlighted in the code, in red about those elements. So it's talking about where conservation is not possible. And how does this work in our world today? Should the code allow for a more balanced and nuanced decision about conservation? And if the site is such a valuable resource, when is the right time to start exploring it and benefit from that knowledge gain? As we head on through Rule 2.2 of the code, there's words that sort of pop up in that section that seem to be quite out of date. We're talking about pure research, and we're talking about projects prompted by research or the needs of rescue. And rescue is definitely a sort of 70s and 80s word. And from a time when there was a lot less resource and no developer funding. So is this, as we've just discussed more recent in Paul's section, is it reflecting a situation of its time, and how accurate is it to what we're doing today, particularly as archaeology is all for research purposes. And then just a quick aside, if anyone wants a quick sort of canter through how archaeology has changed from the 1950s through to the 2015, there's a nice article in The Archaeologist 98 from Jan Wills and Stuart Bryant that kind of cover this, and there's some interesting photos in that too. So then into Rule 2.3, which again is probably okay, but again we're talking about research projects in here. So I guess my first question is how out of date is the Code of Conduct? Reflecting on that question about, is it written at a time when archaeology was doing something then, and what does it actually reflect about what we're doing now? And equally, the counter side of this is what's not included in the Code of Conduct that should be included in the Code of Conduct that reflects some of the morals and expectations that we have on archaeologists now, which relate to archaeological practice. What is obviously missing from the code. And in the consultation wording that we've got that's out, we kind of reflect on whether there should be more around the environment, around climate change, around equality and diversity and inclusion, or about the culture change that we expect or the expectations that we have on ourselves to kind of, as Paul said, so encourage that culture and the way we behave. Should these be specifically referenced in the code? Is that right, that we should have those particular rules? And then how do they relate to the points that Leo's raised in her earlier discussions and their global application, which I think is important. And I hadn't really kind of considered that until Leo stood up earlier. So should these go in the code? Should they be reflected in the code? Are they relevant? And this is a very short introduction to that. So I want to hand over to you about what you think is missing from the code and what is not relevant in the code anymore.